Okay, let's look at putting our fascia and our barges on. So the first thing we need to make sure of is that the top of our fascia lines up with the top of where our roof batten is going to go. So we need to know how thick the roof batten needs to be. Now I didn't have a second person helping me install this on this day, so I've just used a couple of fascia holders that I've cut up. Just clamp them to the rafters, slide the fascia in, and you can adjust each end to height or slide the fascia back and forth until it's in the right spot. We just measure and cut the fascia to length, make sure we get the 45-degree cuts in the right direction. And when we put it up, there's a couple of things we need to make sure of. One, it should be level all the way around, but it also should be parallel with the house. And this is especially important when we have brickwork, which is going to be around the corner. You'll see that in a moment. So we can check that. Once we install it, we can make sure that the long point of the miter lines up with the back of that cut. Make sure you don't get mixed up between your short points and your long points when you're lining things up around the corners. And we can just nail it in place. Now we're going to use duplex nails only because it'll make it easier to pull the whole job apart when we've finished and you've got it assessed. You'll notice I've got this bottom nail in at an angle. That's because when the nails go in, we want to get one close to the top and we want to get one close to the bottom, but we don't want it coming out through the bottom corner of that angle. So there's the first piece of fascia up. Now we can just keep going around, put the second one in, being very wary of these rafter ends, because if any of these rafter ends are a little bit up and down, you may not be able to line up with all of the rafters. You might have to just sort of take an average of the high ones and the low ones. On a new home, like I said earlier, it shouldn't be a problem. It's only when you get to the old houses and you're renovating them that sometimes these rafters might be bowed up or bowed down. There's that fascia in, and here's where I was talking about the mortar line of the brickwork should appear parallel to the fascia. And if it doesn't, it means something's out. Either maybe the footings in the house have sunk and the brickwork is no longer level, or perhaps these rafters are not quite in a straight line. But check for level and check for parallel. This is just another method I use to get fascias following parallel to the house. I just stick the level on top of the top plate, go out level and measure the height difference to the fascia, and I check that at both ends. And it's just a triple check on whether my fascia is running parallel to the framework of my house. When the corners go together, just pre-drill and nail them with some 50mm duplex nails. Make sure the miters are nice and neat. Any rafter ends that may be hanging a bit low, we just cut them off like that. And that just keeps the groove clear for the sheets to go into. But hopefully you won't have to do that. So we make sure the fascia is nice and straight going out to the hip rafter. Now I want to make a bit of a mention about this hip rafter. We can see I've cut this from both sides, but I've got quite a large 45-degree cut on one side and quite a short one on the other side. And that's because this rafter is perhaps not quite straight coming down the corner of the hip. So if that happens, you can either put a batten across there and pull that straight, or you just cut it where it sits. And so long as that fascia is straight coming through and straight coming through in this direction, that means the whole roof, once it's sheeted, will appear nice and square and straight all the way through. Anyway, where the fascia comes through and hits on the hip raft, you just mark it, and we'll mark that 45 degrees. There's the 45 degree marked on that side. And we just set our power saw to just a little bit over the depth and run a cut up through there and cut the 45 on there. Alternatively, you could just measure and cut it on the saw stools before putting it up. But I just like to cut one end, put it in, and then cut the other end on site. It's just a way I like to do it. So we'll repeat the same process on the other side of the hip. Make sure it's pre-drilled and nailed right through the miter. We don't want any gaps in that miter. And when we come around to do the barge, we do the same thing, just run a straight edge or a string line down so that we can mark where this fascia running past needs to be cut off. So there's where our mark is. We're just going to square that up. Make sure you're remembering you're marking the short point, not the long point. So don't get those mixed up and end up cutting this fascia off too short. Set your saw to 45 degrees, run a cut down there. Now we're going to cut the barge to suit. I'm just going to get that angle, which should be the plumb cut of our roof pitch, mark it on the back of my barge. So we've got our plumb angle marked in that direction, and we're going to tilt the saw over at 45 degrees to cut it through in that direction. So we'll end up with a nice little compound cut on the bottom end of our barge. And when it gets installed, we try it, we can see there's a bit of a gap there, so I've had to go through with a planer, just give it a little bit of a trim and a bit of a neaten up, top and bottom, and now it sits up nice and tight with no gaps. From behind, we're going to run a soffit sheet down the sloping eaves, so the bottom groove has to line up. We're not lining up the top, we're not lining up the bottom, it is the groove that we are lining up on the inside there. When you go to nail it in, if there's any splits in the board, don't keep driving the nail in, just pull it out and re-drill and re-nail it. We don't want bits coming out of the face. Now you'll notice in both these photos the bottom corner is running past a little bit, and that's to be expected. So the way we finish that off is just grab a hand plane and go horizontally across and take it off until it's flush. So we've given it a few hits, it's nearly flush there, and now unfortunately the photo's a bit blurry, but a nice flush clean bottom end to that barge. And that's the fascia ends done. We've got nice neat miters on the fascia and nice neat miters on the barges.